Hello, everyone. I'm Graham Ledger, and welcome to the Daily Ledger. Our cover story: the Muslim invasion of Europe explodes yet again in deadly fashion. Twin attacks in Brussels, Belgium, one at the airport, the other on a metro train filled with passengers at rush hour. Both cost many, many innocent lives. The death toll now up to 34, with more than 200 people wounded, including several Americans. The Islamic State is claiming responsibility in this latest pair of attacks on Western civilization. Now, these were just normal people, mostly Europeans, going about their lives, traveling to work or home or vacation, and suddenly, suicide blasts, carnage, and chaos.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
What it was? A job, or was it a terrorist?
We're the soldiers.
A soldier can also do nothing.
Get over here. Get over there. That's safe. I'm not leaving. Get over here. Man, I'm safe. Stay. Stay. Stay right there.
At the moment, the evacuation of victims is ongoing, and it is difficult to get the precise answers to the questions being posed because the emergency services will have to evaluate the precise situation in terms of the identity of the people concerned. This is also the case for the people who are not of Belgian nationality, and for them, their embassies are in contact with the foreign ministry so we can get answers.
Now, the country of Belgium was supposedly on heightened alert, this following the arrest of Salah Abdeslam, the terrorist behind the Paris slaughter back in November. So here we go again. Another attack, another slaughter of human life, another bunch of platitudes from political leaders defending Islam as the so-called religion of peace. Here's the truth. Brussels is a deadly preview of what is going to take place here in this country if we don't, as a nation, come up with a plan to protect our people from radical Islam. Joining me now from San Antonio, Texas, Director of the Center for Terrorism Law at St. Mary's University, Jeffrey Addicott. Jeffrey, in Europe, once again today, one soft target, so-called, one secure target, so-called. Really, there is no secure place on this earth when you're dealing with radical Islam and these terrorist strikes, is there?
Well, you're right. I mean, you have to identify who the enemy is, and that's one of the problems we've had here in this country. It's like a Harry Potter movie, the name that must not be mentioned. It's radical Islam. You can say it. And of course, once you identify the enemy, you have to take concrete steps to stop them. If you're trying to stop them at the airport, if you're trying to stop them at the subway station, I can tell you, you're too late. We need to have steps to stop them before they get to the airport, which means intelligence gathering. And of course, as I started this conversation with you, you've got to identify who the enemy is. Our president spent 1 minute in his address from Cuba about this horrendous attack. 1 minute, and that's all.
Less than a minute, 51 seconds to be precise. And it shows his lack of interest in it. He had a perfect stage, a perfect element to be in to talk about radical Islam and even maybe pull in the Cuban government to help fight it. But of course, he blew the opportunity and relegates it to the back burner, which is really a hallmark of his administration anyway. But back to the attack. This happened, from what I understand, in front of or near an American Airlines check-in. And clearly, American assets are targeted and are vulnerable overseas.
Absolutely. We're vulnerable overseas. We're vulnerable here. It's a question of security. But again, I would spend my money on gathering intelligence, but you can't gather intelligence when you're up against a system of political correctness that will not identify the enemy, that will not teach our FBI agents at the academy who the enemy is. It's verboten to even mention these things, and if you do, you're a hater. I'm going to make a shameless plug. I've got a new book, Radical Islam Why, where I identify these things. I give solutions about what to do. But this should be another wake-up call, if not for Europe, for us. The Europeans, it's almost too late because they have inundated themselves with multiculturalism. But the little secret is they don't want to assimilate. Radical Islamic extremists do not want to assimilate. They want to kill you.
And this attack in particular, in your mind, from what we know so far, this pair of attacks, do you believe it was in retaliation for the arrest of this so-called mastermind, if there is such a thing, of slaughtering innocent life in Paris? Or do you believe that this was part of his cell and they executed this plan, this deadly attack and a pair of attacks on the subway and at the airport, because they were afraid that he might have spilled the beans to the authorities?
Now, I was in the military for 20 years, and I spent a quarter of that time with the U.S. Army Special Forces. So this type of operation takes months to plan. Logistical aspects of it, the scanning, finding who's going to do the attack. So this was not something that was in response, per se, to this arrest. They might have moved up the timetable, but I can tell you right now that there are other attacks that are being plotted, both from ISIS Central over there, as well as in Europe, as well as in this country right now.
Belgium also tightened security at its nuclear plants. Is that standard operating procedure after an attack like this, or do you believe that they have information that these terrorists are possibly targeting nuclear plants?
We've had chatter all along for years that these individuals want to target critical infrastructures. And in fact, they've done so in the past. But, you know, we need to stop closing the barn door after the horse gets out. I mean, we took off our shoes after the shoe plot. We stopped the liquids after the liquid plot. We need to lean forward in the saddle, which means we need leadership. I think that's why you see many people in this country that are supporting Donald Trump, because he basically is taking the tape off the mouth. Sometimes, of course, a little inarticulate, but he's telling it like it is. We need security. We need to recognize who the enemy is. We need to put those assets there where they'll do the most good. 3
major terror attacks. One in Paris, one in the United States in San Bernardino, and now this one in Belgium in the last 6 months. What does this tell you? If the Islamic State is either directly or indirectly behind all 3 of these, or even if they're not, does it tell you that there is some sort of concerted effort to possibly spread the Islamic State and its carnage well beyond what's happening in the Middle East?
That's an excellent point. And they're growing. I mean, this is not on the decrease, it's on the increase. In 2015, in this country alone, we had 76 arrests or prosecutions in federal court of jihadists. And that's the most that we've seen at any time since 9/11. It's on the increase. They're inspired as never before. Why? ISIS. That's one target we can identify. They're above the ground. They're not hiding in the sewers. They're above the ground. We know where they're at. The president of France said, we're at war. You know, let's not, use the rhetoric unless we're going to back it up. Go in there and destroy them. That will take the wind out of their sails for at least 4 or 5 years. And then the jihadists around the world that are inspired by radical Islam, they will go back into their holes where they belong until they come back again. And then we have to meet them with force again.
Radical Islam is the term that you referred to a couple of minutes ago that the President of the United States won't even utter. He won't even admit there is radical Islam. And some people would say we don't need that modifier of radical before Islam. I've read parts of the Quran. I've read the associated teachings. And I'll say this, that I don't see any tolerance in this religion. In fact, I think this religion and this ideology is a zero tolerance religion and ideology. Is that what you conclude in your book?
No, I don't. Most people are born into their religion. You're a Muslim because your parents are Muslim. You're Hindu because your parents are Hindu. They don't really have much of a choice. And if you ask a Muslim on the street about the basic tenets of their faith, they'd be hard-pressed to give you the pillars of Islam or to tell you about the verses in the Quran. So what they do also is they take their scissors out, they cut out the portions that are violent, and they adopt the portions that are peaceful. Not all Islam is associated with radical Islam. That's why I use that term. Same concept in Christianity. I mean,
right. You're talking about Christians who, Catholics, for example, who go to church Christmas and Easter. They're not necessarily involved in the entire teaching. But the bottom line is the undercurrent of this teaching is not tolerant. This ideology is not tolerant at all.
Well, that's why the jihadists, they call themselves the true Islam. Osama bin Laden, after 9/11, said, this attack will show everyone what true Islam is. They don't call themselves radical Islam because they look at the violent verses, they see that they come later in time, and they take those to heart. The vast majority of Muslims do not take those verses to heart, which is a good thing. But there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them that do. And it's certainly true that moderate Islam, whatever you want to call that, those that do not believe in violence, they need to stand up and to assist law enforcement to root out those that do.
We keep saying that. Yet I would argue that the mosques in this country aren't necessarily places of worship, but incubators for Islam. And I think that that's something this country needs to come to grips with. And I think Europe has to come to grips with. It is on a suicide mission by allowing these suicidal barbarians into their countries. Jeffrey, thanks. Coming up next, the Arizona primary and the Utah caucuses. Also ahead, the mother of one of the Benghazi Four responds to this.
Secretary Clinton, did you lie to them?
You know, look, I feel a great deal of sympathy for the families of the 4 brave Americans that we lost at Benghazi.